Welcome to Centennial Oral Histories, a series featuring former and current leaders of Duke University and Duke Health, sharing memories of their time at Duke and their hopes for Duke's future. Enjoy this discussion with MIT President Sally Kornbluth, a renowned cell biologist who spent nearly 3 decades contributing to Duke's academic excellence and leadership, including her role as the first female provost of Duke University. She is interviewed by Dean Mary Klotman, MD, a nationally recognized leader in academic medicine, serving as Duke's Executive Vice President for Health Affairs, Dean of the School of Medicine, and Chief Academic Officer for Duke Health.
Welcome to Duke Centennial Oral Histories. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Sally Kornbluth. Sally, you've had a 30-year history at Duke before you left us to be president of MIT, and you've had multiple roles at Duke. But what brought you to Duke originally?
Yeah, I came to Duke when I was first an assistant professor, and honestly, I was in the middle of my postdoc. I started to apply, and, like everybody, I applied to 60-something places because the job market even then was somewhat tight. And my husband, Danny, and I were looking for jobs at the same place. And, actually we applied all over, and we didn't tell them that we were married. And
that's interesting.
Yeah. And as luck would have it, we had a good number of interviews at the same place. And I remember because we were interviewing in the molecular cancer biology department, which doesn't exist anymore. It's now pharmacology and cancer biology. And I came down to interview, and I remember this, and they seemed to like my application, and they said, "Is there anything that would, be a hindrance to you coming to Duke?" And I said, "Well, my husband's also applied." And they looked and they looked, and they couldn't find his application. And so they asked him to fax over the application fax. So that also dates us a little bit. This was in 1993. And so he faxed it over. And I remember passing Pat Casey in the hallway. And he said, "We got your husband's application." I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "He's even better than you are." So
thank you, miss.
So we were both fortunate to get jobs here. And I have to say, there were some other places that offered both of us, but the people in the department were just incredibly welcoming. And I just also saw the opportunity not only to have great colleagues, and I was very interested in cancer biology, but also to have great graduate students, which was, one of our absolute priorities. And so it was just a really appealing and attractive offer. And, we had a son at the time. We had a daughter in my first year as a faculty member. We moved down here, and, it was such a great place. So we stayed for 30 years.
Well, you said down here. So you moved from New York, right?
Well, I say down here because I was a graduate student at York. I should, and I think of myself as a Northeastern person, but in actuality, we moved from San Diego. So across in that case. But to me, North Carolina was always, down there.
So we know you as a leader, but you actually came here as a biomedical scientist. What got you into research?
Yeah, it was funny. I was actually a political science major in college at Williams.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so I was forced to take some science courses. And I still remember as a freshman tour guide, I went to the science quad and I said, "Oh, this is a lovely quad. I'm sure I'll never take a class here." Well, I hadn't actually looked at the requirements. And so I wound up taking a biology course. And actually it was because someone I was dating was taking that class. I had no real thinking behind what's
good a reason as any.
Good a reason as any. And I took a human biology and social issues course from someone named Bill DeWitt, who was just a transformative professor. He was a fabulous teacher. And I just got really excited by the biology. And so I decided to take a little bit more and a little bit more, but I finished my political science major, and I was really fortunate to get a fellowship over to a scholarship to Cambridge University in England, because Williams had a donor that gave them money to send people every year to Cambridge. So I went to Cambridge and I did a second bachelor's degree in genetics.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, which is actually kind of amusing because I'm really not a geneticist. In fact, if I had to look across the biological sciences, that's the one I'm actually least talented at. And so after that, we went to Danny. I met my husband at Cambridge. He was also in genetics. He stayed a geneticist, a very good one. And we came to Rockefeller in New York to do our PhDs. And I got really interested in cancer biology. I did my PhD in molecular cancer biology. And then went to San Diego for postdoc, where I worked in cell cycle. And then we got recruited to Duke, and I had planned to work on a certain aspect of the cell cycle, and I was literally scooped within like the first 2 weeks of my faculty position on my major project.
Oh.
And I remember sort of sitting on the couch thinking, what am I going to do now? And I had a rotation student who observed this phenomenon, Erica Evans, and there was, we used to make artificial nuclei in the test tube, and I won't go into the details, but we observed the nuclei fragmenting in a way that was very reminiscent of apoptosis. And another one of my colleagues in San Diego had been working on apoptosis in the test tube. In other words, the hallmarks of cell death in the test tube. And I thought, well, maybe we'll work on that. The reconstitution seems robust. And so we started to work on cell cycle and cell death out of that. And then we moved beyond the model system to mammalian systems as well, to study both cell cycle and cell death. So it was really just kind of serendipitous and a little bit of a product of thinking I wanted to study one thing and finding out that pathway might be blocked. And then,
But did you have any idea where it was going to go? So it was interesting, but
a little bit, because, it was all predicated on the kind of work I had done as a graduate student. I had been working in the lab of Sapporo Hanafusa, who we worked on tyrosine kinase signaling. And it was really about reconstructing signaling pathways. And that's sort of what I was interested in cell cycle as well. And the field of apoptosis, which is now, like thousands and thousands and thousands of papers a year, was really nascent then. And it was very clear that we would have to construct the signaling pathways that led to cell death in response to a number of different stimuli. So we were working in a system derived from a xenopus, eggs. So we were wondering what triggered cell death in the egg system. And then we found out there was really fundamental machinery that was, we could extrapolate to other systems as well. So it started really just trying to get a map, if you will, an intricate map of the signaling pathways. And then we started to think about cancer relevance. So we started to work on ovarian cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer, to try to understand why in cancer the cell death programs fail, so that, it makes the cells more resistant to cell death, and so you get a greater cell mass as well as increased proliferation. And then we became interested in how cells die in response to chemotherapeutic agents. And we also became interested in how the aberrations in metabolism in cancer cells lead to resistance to cell death.
Okay.
And so it was a kind of circuitous, but we followed all these signaling pathways.
So good you got scooped.
Yeah, it was
Good.
great.
Led to a great path.
Exactly.
So you're more known now for your leadership position. And historically, you were the first and only woman provost at Duke. Did that influence the role that you played at all?
That's interesting. I guess because Nan Cohan had been a woman president at Duke, I wasn't like the first woman in leadership at Duke. But, we talked about this before, and we can talk about extensively sort of women's leadership styles. So, to me, being a leader at a place like Duke, where I'd been for such a long time, was really relational, like knowing all the people, knowing who to call, sort of in a very high touch way, really trying to get as much input into every decision. And so I think that was driven. I think it tends to be more a woman's leadership style, but also I think it's my own personal style.
Right.
And, it's interesting. I found that a little bit more of a challenge now, going to a place where I don't know anybody and, having to develop those relationships from scratch, where, when I was at Duke, there were people whose kids were in the daycare class of my kids. I didn't know them for any.
It helps.
Yeah, right. I didn't know for any professional reasons, but I really knew who to call. And so the other thing about my provost role, though, I think, was having been in the medical school as a vice dean for 8 years and faculty member. I think it was an unprecedented opportunity to really be able to tap into the expertise in the medical school and have all those cross collaborations. As we work together a lot.
Yeah.
And that was also a product of just knowing who to call all the time. And, and really being sort of fearless across the divide, where I think there could have been a feeling of like those people over there and us over here. I never had that feeling, because I felt, who am I going to call? I'm going to call Scott Gibson. I'm going to go, whatever.
Well, I appreciate that connection. But the other aspect of your provost job is you took over from somebody, Peter Lang, who had had it for 30 years.
Yes.
That must have been interesting to think about how you were going to have your own provost style.
Yeah, it's interesting because so Peter had been provost for the bulk of my time as a faculty member, a lot of it.
Right.
And, I was on ECAT, the Executive Committee of the Academic Council, when Peter was provost. So, I had sort of seen his leadership up close. And, truthfully, part of what I think even made me, if you will, sort of eligible to be provost was I had been on a lot of committees and had a lot of interaction on the campus side and had a lot of interaction with Peter. And so I kind of had a pretty good idea what a provost had to do. The other thing is I will say that a lot of what Duke is now known for, interdisciplinary work, experiential learning, etc., was really started under Peter. So it was really an incredible foundation. And you're right, our styles are quite different, but I had, I don't think I could do things the way Peter did them, even if I tried. I was joking with him once that, I don't like if I enter a room full of tons of people I don't know, I'll just kind of stand and observe. I always felt like if Peter entered a room, like the seas would part, like, he's like such a big presence, kind of thing. And so we just had different ways of doing things. But I think one thing that Peter and I share is the notion that like you have to kind of have a sense of humor about the whole thing, because if not, like every day's blips would drive you crazy. And so the other thing I think Peter told me, which I think was fundamental to being a happy provost, you have to be a curious person because you spend so much time in meetings with people on so many different things. And if you tune out, it would be terrible. You have to really find all different kinds of work interesting. So although I really loved the biomedical research in the medical school, coming over to the campus side and like hearing what the econ department was doing and what the English department was doing and the history department was doing, Peter was right. Like you really had to be, super engaged. And I think that was part of his style that I share. And the other thing he once told me was like being provost is the art of persuasion. And that is absolutely true. You kind of have to convince, there's no real power. You have to sort of convince people to do things, except the power of the checkbook, obviously, but which does help. But so, yeah, I mean, I think I took that foundation and did things my own way. Again, which as I said was, very getting to know people well, trying to get broad input. I had such a great vice provost team, made such a huge difference. Jennifer Francis as executive vice provost, just people I could totally trust and delegate to. That made it so much.
Let's go into some more details about those years because being a provost is not always easy. Yeah. So start with some of the challenges that either you were surprised at or you just really struggled with.
Yeah, I mean, I think something I had to learn to navigate that is much more pronounced on the campus side. Even though I'd been on ECAC, I hadn't really had a flavor for faculty governance and how decision-making in the context of faculty governance works. So I learned pretty quickly to have like the chair of academic council on speed dial and really try to work things through because there's something called the Christie rule here, which is the administration doesn't make any major decisions without at least consultation with the faculty. So, that I really had to get used to. There was consultation in the medical school, but not in quite the same way. So I think that was something. The other thing is that, I was so used to being steeped in a science environment. As you know, the science initiative started as a collaboration between the campus and the medical school, sort of in my time as provost. And I really felt it was important to sort of beef up the science. And I was really gratified recently, the Times Higher Education, Duke was number 5 in interdisciplinary science. And I think all that like groundwork that, we laid between the medical school and the campus, that really, really paid off. So, just kind of working in a different environment there, you like, how do you get people to really be, aggressive with things like NIH grants? And, it's just a very different mentality. And I think I really had to kind of adapt to, that. And also just kind of think about, the learning enough of the different fields to be able to do things like weigh in on tenure cases and really trying to understand. So, I remember I was at a tenure case for the Sanford School of Public Policy. And, you would look at publications and, they were fine. but the person that had a huge impact on actual policy in Washington.
Right.
This is a very different consideration. So learning how to navigate that, I think was, something new to me. But it was pretty fun, I have to say.
So you mentioned faculty governance, and talk a little bit about how important that is in these roles to really understand faculty governance.
Yeah, it's interesting because every place has a little bit of a different model of faculty governance. And it's funny because at MIT, it's governance, the faculty meetings are the faculty as a whole. There's not like a faculty senate. Here, the academic council, in terms of serving as a faculty senate, I think, here's one example. I go back to DKU, Duke Conchon University, and getting DKU through. Back at the time, a little bit before DKU was being established, Yale NUS was being established, which doesn't exist anymore. And I believe that there was a really different sort of process there in faculty reaction. And I think we felt that unless we got deep faculty buy-in for DKU, we were never going to get it off the ground. And I remember when I became provost, Dick Broadhead said to me, you're really going to have to focus on figuring out how to get an undergraduate degree at DKU through and approved by the faculty. And at Duke, that really means getting approval by academic council.
Right.
And, I spent 2 years going to every department, and talking about DKU and the potential benefits. And I felt, honestly, a little bit when the vote came that it was like, I felt like a Senate whip, I knew almost how
And you had the voting board.
I did. I had a picture, a thing on my door of every member of academic council. I sort of had a sense. Now, I have to say there were members of the Duke community that really carried the water. When it came to academic council meetings, there were people that stood up and made very compelling comments. Melanie Mannion comes to mind, Stephan Boss, people who really spoke, and times have changed. So I wouldn't hold them to everything they said then, but I think it was really important and accurate at the time that people understood, why DKU was going to be important in the world. But I remember it had to be a partner with faculty governance because we have faculty that go over there and teach, and they offer a Duke degree. Okay. So it was so important to have the imprimatur of the faculty. And, during COVID, we had to work really closely with faculty governance on, when were classes going back into session? Were our rules reasonable?
Were the
disciplinary processes reasonable? And I think, honestly, it's a little bit like, ECAC always felt to me a little bit like team of rivals in that everybody wanted the same goal. And it was a healthy level of disagreement and argument and discussion. It never, Duke faculty governance, I think, is very healthy. It never really felt contentious. It just felt like, we had to argue and work it through.
Real debate.
Yeah. And we didn't always agree, but I really felt like all the academic council chairs I worked with wanted the best for Duke and tried to be as responsive as possible. And that ECAC had a really kind of healthy, again, argument, but in a very collegial way, culture. And, the full academic council would then rely a lot on how ECAC reported out and what they supported in order to have further discussion. So I think it's a very robust and very healthy process.
Well, obviously that decision to go to DKU and our Duke NUS has really established us as a global entity. So really important.
I just got back from Singapore and on MIT business, but, everybody knows Duke NUS, and the folks I met had involvement at Duke NUS. I mean, it's been so incredible.
But I think you learned, and certainly my involvement with Duke NUS, I'm learning that establishing the relationships, laying the groundwork, being able to articulate the reason for doing it is really important to the long-term success.
Exactly.
So that was a success. We had lots of challenges the years you were provost because we had COVID.
Yeah, that was crazy.
I know.
I think back on that. As you know, when I was in the medical school, there were some challenges too with, famous cases, et cetera, we won't go into, but this was a different order because it affected everybody. And, in some cases, I hate to exaggerate, but it felt like life and death. I mean, people could, could die from us.
Yeah.
And, we had students who were immunocompromised and faculty who were immunocompromised who we had to really think about. And at the same time, think about the educational goals for the institution. And I felt like it was so important to get people back in the classroom. And I honestly think Duke was one of the best institutions at navigating this. Ironically, MIT is one of the other places that went to a high level of testing. And I think that was set up here really well because of the, vaccine
Institute, yeah.
And Tom Denny and colleagues really knew how to do it. So going to pooled testing,
Right.
and I remember talking to Vince at the time and saying, we really just need to do tons of asymptomatic testing. And he was like, I think you're right. And we, Kyle Kavanaugh, they just made this hum. There were 15 testing stations all over Duke. It was just an extraordinary effort. And the team met every day. And I remember, I got into needlepoint during the pandemic, just like
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And I remember I made Mike Schoenfeld a needlepoint thing that said survive in advance that had the blue double with a hypodermic needle and the whole thing. And, it just, as a team, we really did. We just survived and advanced.
I think it was a real demonstration of that collaborative culture that we talk about.
Absolutely.
But we had to do it.
That's right. I remember calling Colin Duckett all the time, what's happening at the Vaccine Institute? How do we coordinate this? And I think it really was, I think the medical school really stepped up. And I think, the other thing is the sort of student life process really worked well, getting the students to really participate in an important way.
Yeah. So what would you say are the things you're proudest of in your role as provost at Duke?
So, part of it, honestly, was just the team that was built, many of whom are still here, Mary Pat McMahon, Allison, and, all these folks who were just so extraordinary. But, the science initiative is one, and that actually was preceded by the quantitative initiative, which was really about getting more quantitative people into both life sciences, but also getting more computational people overall, people interested in AI, et cetera. So that sort of was the first entree. But there's a lot of things. I think the interdisciplinary landscape, whether it be, Data Plus or all the other pluses that followed, I think really expanded during that time. We had a program, I don't think it's still running, called Spring Breakthrough that was spun for a few years, which was short spring break courses that were without grades, without stress, that I think was really interesting and fun to do. And, I just feel like we really thought intentionally about how to make the education better and better. And I really think Duke undergraduate is one of, if not the premier place for undergraduate education at this point, because of all the thinking on interdisciplinary learning and, again, experiential learning. And so that I think was great. And, we continued to build the research base. So, I feel like it was a very sort of golden collegial time. We used to, after, before COVID, we felt like a peacetime economy. Things were going well, everything
we didn't know it, but it was really quite peaceful at the time. But Duke Science and Technology, I think, is going to be seen as a really important investment.
I think so.
Why did you see it as such an important thing to invest in?
Because I felt like, the students coming in had variety of interests, but we did have a lot of students interested in STEM coming on the campus side. And, Duke's been known for a long time for its humanity and social sciences. And I felt, aside from the medical school, I felt the tilt was a little stronger than it should be. That we needed a counterweight. We needed to beef up now, there were some great people here. Don't get me wrong. It's not like we didn't have great people. We needed more. We needed to be able to do a group of, a real group hiring and, bring in a strong cohort. And, we're really lucky that the Duke Endowment was willing to partner with us to really make that possible.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say, when you say things I'm proud about, is we really worked on diversity of the faculty when I was provost. And, we hired a large number of underrepresented faculty in the years that I was provost that really made a difference. In partnership with Valerie Ashby, in partnership with some of the other deans. It really, I think, paved the way to a really much more diverse environment overall that I think has benefited Duke.
No, absolutely. So you got a lot done those years.
We did. It was fun. I liked being provost.
I assume that is a job you'd recommend for other folks to consider.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's good.
Absolutely. As long as you like to answer huge volumes of email all the time.
When you think about your leadership style, you mentioned a little bit that you're relational. You love to really establish those relationships. What are some of the other aspects of your leadership style?
I mean, I do think I like to take in a lot of input, and I really like to think out loud, which can sometimes unnerve people because I'll say something and then they'll say, okay, I'll do that. I'm like, no. I didn't mean for you to do that. I'm just talking. I have to think out loud. I think that's a big part of it. I think probably if I had to say, it's a plus and a minus in my style. It can be a minus. I don't have that kind of like large and in charge kind of persona, and there are times that people want that, and I really have to work on that sort of presence kind of thing. And I think also people talk a lot about vision, and I think the strategic planning process I led at Duke. With Susan Lozier, who is actually now at Georgia Tech, but she was the faculty chair of it. We consulted. We had 50 dinners of faculty, and the vision was really kind of making the whole greater than the sum of the parts. And so I think one of my strengths is synthetic. It's not just pulling, ideas out of thin air. It's really identifying the emergent ideas. And, I'm trying to replicate that aspect a little bit at MIT now, trying to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts, which are strong. And I feel like all of the initiatives we did at Duke, I mean, the name of the strategic plan was Together Duke, because it was really about how do we harness all these talents and do something, better. And so, when people ask me about my vision, I think, I have a landscape, see where our strengths are and really capitalize them, see where the gaps are and try to fill in those gaps.
Well, when I think of your leadership and put together that you're synthetic and you also think out loud, I would say what you really, signal to other folks is you want to hear what they have to say.
Absolutely.
And are interested in what they have to say.
Absolutely. Because there's a lot of smart people around here.
Right.
A lot of good ideas. Occasionally I'd have a flash of insight, but a lot of other.
But you engaged, and I think
it was important.
Really capitalized on all of the different views in the room, right. And that's diversity too.
I appreciate that.
So when you look back at Duke, where do you think Duke as an institution is going?
Yeah, I mean, I think Duke's on an incredible upward trajectory. I mean, I don't place a huge stock in rankings, but it's still nice to see that, Duke is in a great position in all the various rankings. I do think this we're going to see the fruits of DST here, namely that a lot of the people that were hired in the last 5 years are sort of coming into the, really sort of big years of their career. And I think you're going to see a lot of interesting interdisciplinary science. I do think that the medical school plays a lot bigger role in sort of the overall thinking of the university in the sense that there's so many collaborations now between the medical school and the campus. I think you're going to continue to see that. And, as I said, the undergraduate education one, all the time when I talk to people here, there's always some new innovation. I mean, even something that goes back a long time, like Focus program, is continuing to evolve and, just really setting an example for a lot of other places on how you innovate in education. So I think that, sort of sky's the limit here.
And have you taken some of Duke to MIT?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've started a number now of interdisciplinary efforts, one in the life sciences, one in AI, one we call Mythic, which is the MIT, I'm going to get it wrong, Human Insight Collaborative, which is really about bringing the human. It's fun. It's like the opposite problem of Duke, right? Their STEM dominates. So how do I bring, the humanities and the social sciences more into the center of the institute? And the students who come to MIT are 97% of the students major in STEM. So it's not like I'm trying to make a bunch of humanities majors, but I really want humanities and the social sciences to more firmly inform the education at MIT. All the technologies that we're coming up with have, social and human dimensions,
Right.
guardrails of AI,
Absolutely.
novel genetic engineering methodologies, what are the ethical implications of human use? We do a lot of work that has potentially dual use, application. So really, what are the ethical lenses, making sure our students understand that, making sure that they're really good writers and, et cetera. So we're trying to do that through a lot more collaboration. So we have a new program of collaboration, for instance, between like engineering and science and the humanities departments. And one thing I learned at Duke is the best way to get novel collaborations and to get things moving is seed money programs.
A little seed money, yes,
Seed money
goes a long way.
we did a whole bunch of things, as you know, from like vouchers in the core facilities to seed money
Mhm.
for interdisciplinary collaborations. So we're deploying some of that at MIT now. And because we don't have a hospital, we're also putting seed money into collaboration, for instance, with MGB, Mass General Brigham, to try to bring those kind of dimensions that I saw were so productive at Duke uh, across institutions, even if we don't have it within the same institution.
Right.
It's funny, I talk about a faculty senate there, and I get kind of mixed response. Some people think it's a great idea, some people think it's a really terrible idea. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, I went to your inauguration and you talked about climate change.
Yeah.
And as you know, that is a major initiative there. When you think of universities, where do you think they play a role in climate change?
Well, I have to say, and I should have mentioned this because it's really the flagship initiative. It's a little bit different from these interdisciplinary collaborations. It's interdisciplinary across the whole institution. So, the thing that MIT has is unbelievable technical depth. So a third of the faculty are already working on something to do with climate. And again, it was this notion of what we talked about at Duke, which is how do you harness the collective to make it greater than the sum of the parts?
And what bigger challenge requires that kind of multidisciplinary approach?
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, we have a nuclear reactor at MIT. We have fusion, we have fission, we have geothermal, et cetera, et cetera. And so we can pull together in a way that I think is somewhat unique in terms of just technical depth. Now, at Duke, there's huge depth in climate policy,
Right.
and so these kind of expertises are complementary. I mean, we are starting a climate policy center at MIT, but it's a little different because it's really reflects the sort of technological depth at MIT. And so I think universities are going to continue to have to really innovate in this space, particularly because the political environment is going to be complicated.
Yeah. And students want us to take
Totally.
this as a major initiative.
I got a letter from, almost 500 undergraduates saying they really want to be involved in climate work. So I think it's going to be really critical.
So I'd like to end by talking about students because in the end,
Yeah.
universities are really about higher education. And you played a big role in the student sort of life at Duke.
Yeah.
How do you feel like you impacted the student life at Duke?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think it started back, honestly, when I was a vice dean in the medical school. In fact, one of my biggest motivations to get into administration was to impact the graduate education.
Right.
And, I think we got more and more sort of attuned to selecting the students that would really be super successful as graduate students. And, we had this Chancellor Scholars Program.
Mhm.
We brought in the most talented students together to recruit. And, most of my personal student interactions were with graduate students, not undergraduates, because I was in the medical school. I had 31 PhD students over my time. And, they're all in great academic places. And so to me, the biggest part of my educational impact personally was,
The
the
individual.
individuals. But in terms of, the students overall, I think we worked really hard on not only the educational piece, but on student culture. I mean, I think, QuadX and all of the work that Mary Pat has done and Gary Bennett, to get launched a really kind of more feeling of like a residential learning environment, I think really sort of has made Duke an even better place for students to come find a home no matter what their interests are, and really have the opportunity to dive deeply into all different kinds of intellectual areas. So I just think it's, just a really fun and enriching place for undergraduates to be, because they get sort of the best of the intellectual, but a lot of thought now. This is a fantastic student life operation into, what students need for wellness, and, how students can, how their interactions could be facilitated so that when they go out into the world, they know not only the academics, but they really have learned about, talking across differences and how to live in, complex environments, et cetera. And I think it does that really well.
So I remember one of the initiatives you led us as deans of the schools through thinking is Duke 2030.
Right, right.
What were your thoughts there in terms of where we were going to go in that period of time?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think I was very focused at the time on the science piece,
Right.
Thinking about where we were going there. And, so at the time, I guess 2030 seemed a little far away.
And it's not before always.
So I think we're seeing sort of the fruits of all that planning, as I was saying, in the push towards interdisciplinary science, in the changes in the educational process. Now when we talk about long-term planning, we're talking about 2050. Yes. I will be retired. If I'm alive,
You and me both. One of the aspects I remember about the thinking of 2030 was continue to enrich the student experience in scholarship and research as an individual
Exactly.
sort of initiative.
Yes. And I do think this is somewhere that Duke could do even more.
Right.
Which is, I don't know what the statistics are now, but at the time I was provost, it was about 50 to 60% of students engaged in research. I think it could be 80 or 90%. It doesn't all have to be laboratory research. I mean,
Right.
humanities research, the social sciences research, but I think it really provides an important dimension to the education, even if students don't want to go on to graduate school or, have research as part of their lives going forward. I just think learning to ask complex questions and figure out how to answer them is important. I remember one of my sort of aha moments when I was provost that I hadn't fully appreciated when I was in the medical school was I went to there was a symposium on slavery that the Bully Glint and the history part was leading. And the different speakers were talking about how they basically stitched together the historical case using the archives. Whether it be the Duke archives or their own universities or national archives, are really thinking about how they chased down the evidence. As a scientist, I had never really thought about this history in that way.
Right.
And I think if I had appreciated that as a student, who knows, I might have been a historian or a political science person, because I liked biology, because I liked understanding the evidence and thinking about what the synthesis of that is and how you create knowledge and create a case. And I think if students appreciate that, the research aspect, and not just going to class and learning about history or learning about political science, that research element really sets them off on a completely different train of thinking.
Yeah. This is a tough question. You worked for two presidents, Dick Broadhead, Vince Price. Thoughts?
Well, I loved working for Dick and I loved working for Vince. So, right now, it was great because it was a little different because with Dick, I was brand new. I was a little bit I think we worked together great, but I felt like I was learning at the feet of the master a little bit, right? He was at the very end of his presidency. And so I was really looking for his wisdom, and I was I always felt a little bit like I had to, prove myself, and not that he was, judgmental or punitive or anything. I just felt like here's somebody who's just been in it for such a long time and knows exactly how things should proceed. Now, to Dick's credit and also Vince's, they both were really good at not micromanaging and not delegating.
Mm-hmm.
And delegating. And so, I never felt like somebody was looking over my shoulder. But, with Dick, I really felt like, okay, am I doing the right thing? And I was really lucky because Richard Rydell, who was, his chief of staff and secretary of the board, I was in Richard's office like 100 times a day because I didn't really know what I was doing. Or sometimes Dick would say something and I'd be like, I don't know what he said. Can you explain this? By the time Vince came, I was 3 years in, and Vince was also a provost at Penn. So, it was a partnership in the sense that I think we had a much more common experience. And so it was, I felt there was a lot of dialogue all the time, but I felt a little bit more like we're coming from the same place kind of thing. And Vince, again, like he trusted me to do things. He had been a provost. He wanted to be a president. You know what I mean? And that distinction. And so, so they were both different, but I felt like, I felt well guided and well treated, etc. And, felt like part of a team. So it was good in both cases.
And a little bit about your team. I know Jennifer was fierce.
I have to say, I had such a great team at Duke.
You really did.
I really did. And, we built it over quite some time. And those people, like Gary Bennett, who I hired as the, Vice Provost for Undergraduate Studies, is now the Dean of Arts and Sciences. I mean, some of these people have, continued to contribute to Duke.
Valerie Ashby
went on to be president of, Maryland, Baltimore County. And, I think that, and the deans, Ravi has gone on, there's a lot of people who developed in a great team that have now gone on to other things. Right. But, we all stay in touch still. And it was just a really great moment. There was incredible collegiality. And I really, really liked that. And also, the president's cabinet, people like Kim Hewitt, people like Stelphany, et cetera. We really just had a great interaction.
Terrific team.
Dan Bernard at the time, And so now that I'm in a different institution, I really like my team members, but it takes time to build that close rapport and to really get to know people. Particularly, I've made a few hires. I hired a wonderful chief of staff. I've just hired a VPR, and so over time, some people will stay who were originally part of the team. There obviously will just by nature be some turnover, but it's really creating a culture. Like they have to get used to my leadership style. I mean, it's thinking out loud true. I mean, I was like, okay, I'm just talking, folks. Don't worry, I ain't just talking, And so they just have to get used to, a different way of doing things. I mean, my predecessor had been provost for 8 years and then president for 10 years at MIT. So, I like him very much, but our styles are not similar. And so just getting used to those differences, I think, has been interesting.
I don't know if you remember, but when I became dean, there was a moment in time where 8 of the 9 deans were women.
Yes.
Which was quite unusual for Duke.
Yes, exactly. And, we didn't set out to do that. May the best person win kind of thing.
I asked you, I said, how did that happen? And you said you just chose the excellent candidate.
Exactly. And so, it wound up that way. And again, I just kind of look at that time as a really interesting moment in time. Institutions keep evolving and, some of the folks have moved on. But I really, it was such a fun time and such a fun group.
And you made it fun for us to lead.
Oh, well.
Of course, it helps when you don't have a crisis.
Crises, exactly.
Well, Sally, thank you so much for this conversation today, and thanks for all you've done for Duke.
Absolutely. Thank you.